Welcome to Reporter's Notebook, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories breaking on their beats. I'm Jim Antle, and I'm joined today by Chief Congressional Correspondent Susan Ferrechio. Susan, after months of talk of legislative inaction and stalemates and Democrats not being able to get anything done despite controlling both houses of Congress, we've seen a little flurry of legislative activity going on now, and it's not just on infrastructure.
Well, there's a bunch of things that Congress needs to pass by the end of the year. And this typically happens on an annual basis now, these sort of fiscal cliffs, because the two sides can never come to an agreement in time for a year-long legislation to pass using what they call regular order. In this instance, there was a big debate over whether they'd be able to pass another stopgap spending bill that would keep the government funded at fiscal 2021 levels. And secondly, there was a big debate between the two parties on whether and how to raise the borrowing limit, because the United States doesn't have enough money to pay its bills. It's got a lot of debt. It takes out loans from other countries, mostly China, and it needs to write regular checks to pay them back without defaulting on our loans. That borrowing limit was set to run out of money on December 15th, according to the Treasury Secretary, Janet Yellen. And so for these past few weeks, the Republicans and Democrats have been in a sort of a fisticuffs over whether and how to raise the debt limit, with Republicans saying, we're not going to help you, Democrats. You spend too much money and you don't let us participate in any of the debate on this spending legislation. Therefore, you raise the debt limit with your own votes, which is a really tricky thing to do. Democrats wanted to force Republicans to play along to some degree so that they could force them to claim it along with Democrats. And that's what they did this week. They came to an agreement that used these sort of procedural gymnastics that would essentially let Democrats raise the debt limit with their own 50 lawmakers and Kamala Harris's tie-breaking vote. But in order to clear the way for that unusual process, because it usually takes 60 votes, it required Republicans to pony up 14 votes of their own in order to get this across the finish line. And that's going to happen next week. So I think before Congress leaves town, they will raise the debt limit likely until after the midterm elections, which is November 2022. So you're looking at another debt limit increase of around $2 trillion. We're already at about more than 27 trillion right now in debt. So it was a big deal to get that done, because what that does is it avoids the risky fiscal cliff / threat of default, which Janet Yellen warned about. Never bodes well for the economy. That was a big accomplishment for Congress to get that done. There was a lot of backlash from conservatives who said Republicans should not have played along. Former President Trump was attacking Republican leaders over and said they essentially caved in to Democrats when they held all the cards in Trump's view. So that was accomplished along with the spending bill. And what that does is it clears the way for Democrats to get back to their Build Back Better agenda, which basically is this huge social welfare and green energy spending package that they can't seem to round up the votes for in the Senate. They're no closer this week than they were last week. They have the holdout Joe Manchin, who so far isn't really acting like he's ready to vote on anything. But you have Chuck Schumer saying, let's do this by Christmas. And finally, one thing they also passed this week, or poised to get done, is the National Defense Authorization Act. That's a spending and policy bill for the military. It's been hung up, gone back and forth between the House and the Senate. Even within the Democratic Party, there are differences on what should be in the bill. They settled on a more basic National Defense Authorization Act that left out some controversial things, including one that would have had women register for the draft for the first time in history. So that's out. Right. And if this thing has gone through in a more traditional structure, and that's done as well. So I think there's a big sigh of relief for Democrats, because they run government. So if they don't get these basic and important things done, looks like they're incompetent. And secondly, it gets in the way of the old Build Back Better, which they can't seem to get across the finish line, despite this commitment to bring it up next week, basically, in order to get it done by Christmas. We'll see if that happens. They can bring it up, but then you've got Joe Manchin hanging out there, whether he's going to vote for it or not. It doesn't sound like he is right now. He said it needs big changes. I don't know, all kinds of things in there he wants to make changes to. And so there's a real sort of interesting development next week if they bring it to the floor, start debating on it, run the clock and call it up for a vote, and we all sit there and wait. Is it going to pass, or is Joe Manchin going to do what he said he was going to do, which is not vote on it until there's more time to contemplate all the provisions and make important changes?
So while Build Back Better might be must pass to the Democrats, it does look like the things that most people regard as must pass legislation is now in pretty good shape. I mean, NDAA, debt ceiling, they are in a good position on those issues right now.
Right. Well, the spending bill for government funding is only at 2021 levels. They per usual are not able to get together on fiscal 2022 spending because Democrats want to put in some provisions that Republicans say are poison pill, like one that would allow taxpayer funding for abortion. They also cut back money on border security, despite the surge there that's been basically out of hand and uncontrollable now for the past year. And secondly, they also wanted to lower defense spending levels so it's not on parity. Usually there's an agreement that defense and domestic spending are equal. That's not the case this time. And Democrats raised domestic spending to a level that Republicans don't agree with because, as we were talking about earlier, they think Democrats spend too much money. So there's no agreement there. Therefore, they're doing these temporary bills. Now, the latest version carries the government over until February. That's not a very long time, but it does put things past the holidays, past the time frame where Democrats, I think, believe they can somehow get the Build Back Better to Biden's desk. That's, February. That's a couple months from now. It gives them a bunch of time to do that. But then they run into the same thing where it's looking more like they're just going to keep dragging out these short-term bills for the next year. And if that's the case, that's really, first of all, it's financially irresponsible. So say government agencies who can't plan well, so waste money. Right. And I know the Defense Department has complained about this for years. It's very difficult for them to plan and operate on temporary spending packages. And that's, I think, an important thing to consider when it comes to national security. So a lot of people are not happy with this sort of stalemate over spending. It'll be interesting to see if things shake out a little bit in the next year. But now you're running into election season. Next year, election season is going to start around March. That sounds crazy, right? Because it's not till November. The going wisdom has always been in an election year after March, things get tougher around Capitol Hill, even tougher than they are right now. So it's the spending situation is not ideal right now. They don't really have agreement that's keeping the government running in a fiscally responsible way. They basically have this Band-Aid going for that. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people will say that that's not, it's more dysfunction basically. And because Democrats run all of government, they're in charge right now. So it's up to them to try to resolve this so there can be 2022 level spending passed. Remember, the fiscal year started October 1st, and now we're already into December, and there's still nothing passed. They're running at last year's levels, which isn't good.
Which creates a dilemma because, as you say, as you head into next year, you're going to have Democrats show what they've done and show that they've had some ability to govern with the majorities that they've been given. But as things drag out longer and longer, they're also going to want to start protecting their members in competitive states and districts from tough votes.
That's right. So Build Back Better is the key element here. They can tout the infrastructure plan they passed because it has things that are very popular. They poll well, roads, right, bridges, broadband, all the things that people deal with every single day in their lives. More questionable in terms of popularity are some of the provisions in Build Back Better. There's a new polling out where people rate what's popular in the bill. It does okay, and overall, it's not wildly popular. It's about half and half when you look at general polling. Of course, much more popular among Democrats than Republicans. But when you look at what's individually popular within the plan, it varies. And what Democrats hope to do is to get this thing signed into law. And then what they say is going to happen is they'll get out there and they're going to just do this sort of blitz where they tout the things that middle-class American, working-class Americans can count on now. This extra $300 a month approximately per child for the extended tax credit, childcare, free preschool essentially for 3 and 4-year-olds, and subsidized for 0 to 2-year-olds for certain age groups. With big, broad subsidies for healthcare that will help people buy health insurance. They feel that they can go out and talk about this to voters, and that will help bring voters to the polls to vote for them in what is otherwise looking like a very difficult election year for Democrats. Whenever you have a new president, the opposite party tends to fare much better in these midterms. We're on track for that to be the case this time, and Democrats don't have a lot of room to play with here. It's not like they have 50 seats that they can spare. They are only ahead by about 3 votes right now in the Senate, and it's evenly in the House, and it's evenly divided in the Senate. It's 50-50. So it's not going to take much for Republicans to win back control of at least one chamber. And of course, once that happens, that's the brakes. You put the brakes on the green light that they have right now to get things done. Because if you have Kevin McCarthy, a Republican, running the House, who's likely to be Speaker, I think, at least at this point, he's not going to let any of these bills come to the floor. So Senate can take up anything it wants, which will be tough because they have a 60 vote threshold. It just basically throws out Biden's agenda. He's not going to get anything done for the 2 years left, other than what he can do with his pen and his phone, as Obama most definitely did during his administration when he didn't have control. He just did the pen and the phone. And then I think that's what you'll see Biden do if Republicans take over. So Democrats are hoping that doesn't happen, that they can sell Build Back Better and infrastructure in their districts and have the difficult parts of the legislation out of the way by the time the campaign heats up. It's going to be tough to get their swing district Democrats to support tax increases, which is essentially what's in this bill, and some of the more controversial stuff. As you're creeping up on the election, you want to kind of they were hoping that to be done by now. They were hoping to just be done with it and just be out there touting the wonderful things about Build Back Better by now. But instead, they're still kind of mired in what's in the bill. Some of the stuff like the methane fee, it's going to raise energy prices here this winter. Some other things that, no work requirements for any of these subsidies, all these things that Joe Manchin is questioning, that I think are holding the bill up right now. And I don't know what the resolution is. It's not there yet. They don't have one at this point.
And then the final elephant in the room is inflation. If the spending proves to be inflationary and these prices don't start coming down, it could cut into people's enthusiasm for some of the Build Back Better benefits.
If now Republicans are doing a good job, and if they continue to do a good job messaging that the spending is causing you to pay more when you buy your gas and go shop for your groceries, that's a powerful message that does resonate with voters generally. They want to know who's responsible for this. You see the stickers that I did that stickers on the gas pumps, that's sort of pegging Biden and his administration and Pelosi with these prices. That's the ticket for the GOP if they can do that. Now, Republicans are trying to argue Build Back Better will lower inflation. They've also, don't forget, Biden has opened up, dumped some of our own oil back in, our emergency oil supply back in. That's supposed to lower prices. That'll be temporary. I think Democrats are hoping that inflation goes down and the job performance issue improves enough that it's not stinging voters to the point where they're just mad and running to the polls to vote for Republicans. I mean, we know that happens. So they're in a precarious situation right now. Clearly, Republicans are all over it. There's also something I'm writing about for our magazine this week, which is how Democrats are just agonizing over a provision in Build Back Better that moderate Democrats have pushed in there that would eliminate the state and local tax cap that Republicans imposed back in 2017. That's a tax cut for people who are wealthy and on a higher earning set there. And Republicans are all over that, saying, look what they're doing in this bill. They're cutting taxes for the rich and they're raising taxes on everybody else. So they let blue state wealthy homeowners deduct more of their property taxes on their when they do their taxes every year. That's something Democrats are messaging aggressively on right now. That another thing that will really irritate voters when they go to the polls, that Democrats added this to the bill. It's expensive. It's a lot of money that the Treasury is going to lose on that. So all of it's competing philosophies here between the two parties. But what ultimately comes down to, Jim, is when people go to vote, they have to ask how their lives are going right now, and if the party in charge is making their lives better or worse. And it's a tough one for Democrats this year with the inflation and the continuing COVID problems and the lockdowns and all, high gas prices. All these things have Democrats really kind of pushing against the wind on this this election year.
It's the age-old question of, are you better off than you were 2 to 4 to 6 years ago?
Right. That's exactly right. And just how are you are hurting right now, or are things going well? And who's Republicans aren't exactly coming out there with big plans. You remember Gingrich and the contract with America or some. Each party always tends to be very vague on what they'll do if they win. They never offer anything really detailed about how they're going to turn things around. For Republicans, it's just, we're not going to allow any more of the Biden administration, social welfare, green energy stuff to come through, legalizing illegal immigrants, that kind of thing. We're going to put a stop to all that. That's essentially their message. And we're going to, work to increase jobs and let the economy flourish without a lot of runaway spending and, regulation. That's their argument. And it may be enough this year. It may be enough without them having something really specific that they're going to do to help people.
Right.
And I think that it's the two competing ideas here between the two parties. We stop this stuff, or in Democrats trying to sell it as a real benefit that people should want. People should want this spending because they'll be able to send their kids to preschool for free and get a check every month from the government for their kids and for their health care. And those are powerful arguments, and just hard. We'll see. The key here are the independents, who right now are not loving the Democratic Party. Those polling for independents is alarming for in some of these polls, not all.
Right.
So, Democrats will stick usually with they're loyal to their party, but we know the Republicans where they are by looking at the polls. But these independents, they're a big, they're up for grabs right now.
It's a tough midterm environment. Thank you, Susan.
Thanks a lot, Jim.
You can read Susan and the rest of our political team's coverage at WashingtonExaminer.com.